Welcome, listener. Tonight we travel back in time, far back, long before the great empires, long before the cities of the modern world had even begun to take shape. We are going to the ancient Arabian desert, to a valley carved into cliffs of rose gold stone, where a prophet walked among his people, and where God sent a miracle so visible, so undeniable, that an entire civilization had no choice but to face the truth, and chose, in the end, to turn away from it. This is the story of the Prophet Salih, peace be upon him, and the blessed She-Camel of God. A story that has been carried for thousands of years across the lips of storytellers, written in the oldest books of the world, and preserved in stone, literally in mountains that are still standing in northwestern Arabia to this very day. It is a story about pride and about mercy, about the stubbornness of the human heart and the patience of a man who loved his people even when they refused to love the truth he brought them. Settle in, close your eyes, let the story begin. Long before the great kingdoms of the ancient world had risen, in the northwestern stretch of the Arabian Peninsula, there lived a people who had mastered something almost no civilization in history ever has. They built their homes inside mountains. They were called the Thamud, and their valley was called Al-Hijr. If you could stand at the entrance of that valley today, and remarkably you still can, because it exists now as an archaeological site in Saudi Arabia, known as Ma'in Salih, you would stop walking the moment you saw it. Rising on every side around you would be enormous cliffs of sandstone, the color of old honey and warm terracotta, and carved into those cliffs from floor to ceiling are doorways. Grand doorways, framed with columns still attached to the living rock, leading into cool chambers cut deep into the mountain itself. Doorways that have been standing, perfectly intact, for more than 4,000 years. The Thamud did not build their homes from stone, they carved them out of it. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they went into the mountain with their tools, and they shaped the rock from the inside, and what they left behind was a civilization of extraordinary beauty and permanence. Step into one of those rooms in your imagination. Feel the coolness immediately, that deep, stored coolness of a place the sun has never directly touched. The walls are smooth, the floor is level. A square window cut into the far wall frames a piece of sky so blue it looks painted. Outside, faintly, the sound of wind moving through the valley. The smell of dry stone and desert herbs. These were not desperate people. They were craftsmen, artists, engineers. Their doorways were decorated with carved geometric patterns. Their columns were precise and proportioned. They were proud of what they had built, and in the valley below their carved houses, they had built something else remarkable too. Deep beneath the valley floor, underground rivers moved unseen through the ancient earth. The Thamud knew how to find them. They dug wells, deep and expertly lined, and the water that came up was clean and reliable through every season. With it, they grew gardens in the middle of the desert, fig trees and pomegranate, grapevines heavy with dark fruit, date palms whose shadows stretched long and cool across the courtyard floors. Their animals were healthy. Their storehouses were full. By every visible measure, the Thamud had been given an extraordinary life, but something had been quietly slipping from them for generations. Not food, not water, not stone, but something far more important. They had begun to forget the one who had given it all to them. The God who had carved this valley into existence, who had put the water beneath their feet and the stars above their heads, they had stopped turning to him. Idols appeared instead, placed on hilltops and in courtyard corners, carved from the same stone as their houses, offered grain and incense and prayer. The Thamud worshipped what their own hands had made and called it faith. This forgetting had not happened overnight. It never does. It had come slowly, one generation quietly passing the next, a slightly dimmer version of the truth, until the original light was so far back that no one living could remember it. It was into this world that Salih was born. He was one of the Thamud, fully and completely, a son of this valley, raised in these cliffs, known to every family in Al-Hijr. From his earliest years, the people around him noticed something they found difficult to name, a stillness in him, the kind of stillness that is not emptiness but depth, the way a very deep well looks still at its surface, while far below the water moves endlessly and quietly. He was honest when honesty cost him something. He was gentle with the people the world treated roughly. When disputes arose in the valley, they came to Salih to settle them, because everyone knew he would not bend toward the powerful over the weak. He was the kind of man his community trusted without quite knowing why, instinctively, the way you trust the return of morning. And then, in the quiet and private way the divine has always worked, the revelation came. Salih was now a messenger of God, and his message was as simple and as enormous as the cliff faces surrounding the valley of his birth. There is only one God, the creator of the stone and the water and the desert wind. He alone deserves your worship, your gratitude, your love. These idols you have made, they cannot hear you, they cannot help you. They are the work of your own hands, and your own hands cannot save you. Come back, that is all. Just come back. Salih walked through Al-Hijr and spoke these words with a gentleness that never became weakness. He spoke in the marketplace, and in the shade of the date palms, and at the mouths of the carved doorways. He spoke to merchants and shepherds, to elders and children. Some listened. Their hearts opened the way a room opens when someone finally unlocks the door and lets the morning in. They came to Salih quietly, in ones and twos, and said simply, "We believe you." A small, faithful gathering, growing slowly in the shadow of a valley that mostly wished he would stop talking, because the tribal leaders and wealthy merchants who ran Al-Hijr pushed back hard. They had built their authority on the existing order, on the idol worship, on the social arrangements that kept them at the top, and Salih's message was a direct threat to all of it. They mocked him publicly. They called him confused, bewitched, a man causing unnecessary division in a valley that had been perfectly settled before he arrived. But Salih kept going, with the steady, unshakable calm of a man who knows, with absolute certainty, that he is carrying the truth. He kept going, until one day the leaders came to him with a challenge. Perhaps they believed it would end the debate once and for all. They stood before him in their decorated robes and said, "If your God is truly all-powerful, then prove it. Give us a sign we cannot deny." They pointed to a great smooth face of rock at the edge of the valley. "Bring a she-camel out of that stone, fully grown, and we will believe you." Salih turned toward the rock. He lowered himself in prayer, and the valley went quiet, the deep, held breath quiet that comes just before something the world has never seen before. and then the rock cracked open. The crack in the rock opened slowly, not with violence, not with the crashing force of an earthquake, but with a deep internal shudder, the way something moves when it is alive and waking. The thin dark line split the pale face of the cliff from top to bottom, its edges glowing faintly, as though the inside of the mountain had been holding light for centuries and was only now finally letting it go. The crowd did not move. The tribal chiefs, who had issued the challenge with such confident contempt, stood completely still. The believers who had gathered around Salih stood completely still. The children who had crept to the edges of the crowd to watch stood completely still. The whole valley of Al-Hijr in that moment held its breath. And then she stepped out, a she-camel, fully grown, exactly as they had asked. She came through the opening in the rock with the slow and unhurried grace of a creature that has never once been afraid of anything. And she stood in the afternoon light of the valley, and she was extraordinary. She was larger than any camel the Talmud had ever seen, taller, broader, moving with a weightless quality that made her seem less like an animal and more like a presence. Her coat was almost white, with a pale, luminous quality, as though the light from inside the rock had followed her out and decided to stay. Her eyes were large and deeply dark and calm in a way that was genuinely difficult to hold, like looking into something that had no bottom. She turned her great head and regarded the crowd gathered before her without alarm, without aggression, with nothing in her expression but a patience so absolute it felt older than the valley itself. She had no mother. She had no history. She had come from the rock of the earth by the direct will and power of God, and every person standing in that valley knew it, with a certainty that no argument could touch. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then a man sat down heavily on the ground, his legs simply done with holding him up. A child began to cry, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of witnessing something the mind has no existing category for. Some of the believers wept openly, their hands over their mouths, because here, standing in the dust before their eyes, was the confirmation of everything they had chosen to believe. And the tribal chiefs, these proud and powerful men who had spent years dismissing Salih, mocking him, calling him confused and bewitched and a maker of division, they stood and looked at the she-camel, and they had, for perhaps the first time in their lives, nothing to say. Salih spoke. His voice was steady and clear. This she-camel is a sign from your Lord. She is sacred. She will roam freely through this valley and graze wherever she chooses. The well will be shared. She drinks one day. Your herds drink the next. Do not interfere with her. Do not drive her from her water. And do not harm her, for if you do, a severe punishment will come upon this valley. The camel moved through the crowd and out into the open valley floor, unhurried, following some internal direction of her own, and life in Al-Hijr moved forward into its entirely new shape. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. The she-camel roamed the valley freely, moving along the base of the cliffs, through the edges of the gardens, past the carved doorways and the courtyard fig trees, and wherever she went the other animals grew calm. Horses that startled easily stood still when she passed. The valley's goats and sheep parted for her without fuss. Children followed her at a respectful distance, sitting in the dust to watch her with the particular focused silence that children reserve for things they understand are important, even if they cannot say why. On her days at the well, she drank, and the water came up freely, the deep underground river giving without hesitation, as though it had always known this day would come. And her milk, which she gave in quantities no natural animal could account for, was rich and abundant enough to feed the entire community that gathered around Salih. Those who drank it spoke about it quietly, searching for words for something that sat just past the reach of ordinary description. More people came to Salih's gathering. The miracle had reached past argument, past pride, past the comfortable walls of long-held habit, and opened something in people that words alone had not been able to reach. They came to him in the evenings, in the long, cool shadow of the cliffs, and they sat together and spoke about God and gratitude and the extraordinary valley they had been placed in. Those were good evenings, peaceful evenings, the kind that stay with a community for generations. But in other rooms, behind other doors, the mood was entirely different. The tribal leaders had recovered their voices, and with their voices came something that pride always eventually produces when it has been publicly embarrassed: resentment. They could not deny the miracle. Denying it was simply no longer possible. So instead, they did something more subtle and more dangerous. They reframed it. The she-camel, they said to each other, is a disruption. She takes the well on her days, and our herds go without. She wanders through our valley as she pleases. Our ancestors dug those wells with their own hands, and now we share them by command with an animal that appeared from a rock. They were not speaking about inconvenience. They were speaking about control. The she-camel was a daily, living, breathing reminder that there was an authority in this valley higher than theirs. And that was what they could not bear. Among the most reckless and most angry of the Thamud, 9 men drew together. 9 men who had never bowed and had decided they never would. They met in private and they talked, and each conversation made the next one easier, the way it always does when a group of people are telling each other only what they want to hear. They watched the she-camel. They tracked her movements through the valley, and their plan grew solid between them, the way a terrible idea grows solid when no honest voice is allowed into the room. Salih heard the whispers. He went to his people one more time, and his voice carried a grief that those who heard it never forgot, the grief of a man who can see exactly what is coming and is powerless to stop it if the people he loves will not choose differently. He said, "Do not harm her. I am asking you. Whatever your pride is telling you, whatever your anger is saying, leave her. She is a sign of God in this valley. The consequence of harming her is not something I am exaggerating for effect. I am reading you the terms of something much larger than any of us." The valley listened. The valley did not answer, and the she-camel grazed in the last light of evening, her pale coat catching the final amber of the sun, moving through the long shadows of the cliffs with the same unhurried calm she had carried since the day she stepped from the rock. Above her, the stars were beginning to appear one by one in the darkening sky, cold and brilliant and patient the way truth is always patient, even when the people below it are not. The 9 men had already made their decision. The morning they chose was like any other morning. The sky turned from deep blue to rose to gold in the east, the way it has done every single morning since the beginning of the world. The valley of Al-Hijr was cool and quiet. The carved doorways in the cliffs faced the early light in silence. The date palms at the edge of the gardens stood perfectly still, not a leaf moving, the air between them clean and unhurried. The she-camel was where she always was, at that hour moving slowly through the wet grass near the gardens, grazing in the long shadows of the cliff face, her pale coat catching the first warmth of the morning sun. The 9 men moved together. It was over quickly, a single act of violence in the golden silence of the morning. The she-camel fell to the earth, and the valley went still in a way that felt entirely different from any stillness before it. Not the stillness of wonder, not the stillness before a miracle, but the deep and ringing silence that follows something that cannot be undone. The news moved through Al-Hijr like a wind through an open corridor. People came to their doorways. They stood at the mouths of their carved houses and looked toward the valley floor, and on their faces were expressions of every kind. Some who had quietly wished for this felt, now that it had happened, not relief but fear, a cold and sudden fear, the kind that arrives when you realize the thing you dismissed as exaggeration was not exaggerated at all. Some who had believed in the she-camel wept without speaking, and some simply stood very still and waited, the way people wait when they know something is coming, and there is no longer anything to be done about it. Salih came to his people, and his voice, when he spoke, carried something that silenced every sound in the valley. Not anger, never anger from this man, but a grief so vast and so certain that it felt less like emotion and more like weather, like the sky before a storm, when the air changes and every living thing goes quiet. He said, "You have done this. You saw the sign of your Lord with your own eyes, and you have destroyed it. Now listen to me carefully. You have 3 days. 3 days remaining in your homes, in this valley, in the life that God gave you so generously and that you have spent so carelessly. 3 days to turn back, to return to the truth, to ask for the forgiveness that is still, even now, available to every heart that genuinely seeks it. After 3 days, the punishment will come. 3 days." The number settled over Al-Hijr like a change in the light. Some of the Thamud, hearing these words, felt the last wall inside them finally give way. They came to Salih with tears on their faces, asking how to return, how to ask for forgiveness, whether the door was truly still open. And Salih received them with the full warmth of a man who has never, not for a single moment, stopped loving the people who spent years rejecting him. "The door is always open," he told them, "as long as you are breathing. Come through it." But the 9 men and those who had sided with them in their hearts, they hardened further. Some people, when they have gone too far to turn back comfortably, choose to go further rather than turn. It is easier in a way. Turning back requires admitting you were wrong, and some people would rather walk off the edge of a cliff than admit they were wrong. On the first day, the faces of the 9 men turned yellow, the pale, drained yellow of old parchment, of something losing its color from the inside. People who passed them in the valley looked away quickly, the way you look away from something that frightens you without quite knowing why. On the second day, their faces turned red, the deep, heated red of metal approaching a forge, of something burning from within. Their own families could not look at them directly. The children of the valley were kept inside. On the third day, their faces turned black. That morning, the valley of Al-Hijr was quieter than it had ever been. The animals were still. The birds were gone from the date palms. The water in the wells seemed to pause, as though the earth itself was holding something back, gathering itself. And then it came, from no direction and from every direction at once, a sound. A single, vast, overwhelming sound, like the silence of the world ending all at once and all together. It passed through the valley without pausing, through the stone walls and the carved chambers and the cool dark rooms and the courtyard gardens, through everything the Chamud had built with such skill and such pride over so many generations. And the Thamud who had refused to turn back were gone. The valley of Al-Hijr went quiet after that, a different kind of quiet. The carved houses remained standing. They were built too well, cut too deep into the rock for any sound to bring them down. They are standing still. Right now, tonight, as you lie here in the dark, those doorways are there, framed in rose gold sandstone, columns still intact, chambers still cool and level and silent, in the place that is now called Mada-in Salih in northwestern Saudi Arabia. Empty rooms that have held their silence for thousands of years. Corridors where a great civilization once moved and worked and ate and argued and laughed and forgot the truth and paid the price for forgetting. Salih and his believers had left before the punishment came, as they had been told to do. They walked out of the valley and carried the faith forward into the world. That is always how it goes. The truth does not die when the people who rejected it are gone. It travels. It finds new ears, new hearts, new generations lying quietly in the dark, listening, because that is what you are doing right now. The story has reached its end. The valley is still. The stars above Al-Hijr are the same stars above you tonight, the same ones that burned over the Thamud, over Salih, over the She-Camel, grazing in the last light of evening. The same stars that have watched every civilization rise and fill with pride and forget and fall, and have gone on burning through all of it, patient and constant and indifferent to human noise. Let them be above you now. Let the night be wide and quiet around you. You have traveled a long way tonight, back through thousands of years, through a valley of carved stone and underground water and one magnificent white she-camel, through the story of a prophet who loved his people all the way to the end and beyond it. Now let it all go soft. Let the valley fade. Let the cliffs and the doorways and the desert stars dissolve slowly at the edges, the way all good stories do when they have finished their work. You are here. You are still. You are warm and safe and held. Let sleep come now. It is already on its way.